There it is. The webinar is now live. People are moving into the webinar space.
Oh, I see the numbers rising. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, as people join us, just would like to start by saying welcome. Good evening. If you're in the Atlanta area or on the East Coast, good afternoon. If you're other places, good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Nicole Stamment, and I am Associate Professor and Chair of the English Department here at Agnes Scott. I am really delighted to welcome you to this event in our series of events commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Writers Festival. This is the longest continuously running literary festival in the Southeast, and we have been overjoyed to mark the occasion as widely as we can. All week, we've been thinking about the festival's past, remembering both where we have been, the writers who have graced our campus and our community with their words, while we also look to the future and celebrate student writers. Tonight, we are very happy to share with you some returning guests, specifically returning guest Rita Dove, who is our present. So we featured an archival reading from Rita Dove yesterday and is still our present, and we're still so happy. So we're very excited to share this event with you this evening. We are also very thrilled to have playwright Jacqueline Goldfinger joining us this year. She will be reading tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope that you'll be joining us for that event too. Tomorrow is sort of our alum reading series day, and at 2 o'clock we will be featuring our final From the Archives event with Mimi Curtis Tucker. Mimi is this will be a 10-time Writers Festival guest, so we're very excited to share that with you. We will also be featuring the Georgia premiere of Jacqueline Goldfinger's play, The Arsonists, on Showtix4U, and the information about that and the other events can be found at calendar.agnescott.edu. We also hope that you will take a look at Karis Books' virtual book booth, which has information about how to purchase some of the works featured throughout this week. I will now hand things over to President Lee Zak.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this year's keynote address for the Agnes Scott College 50th Annual Writers Festival. As Nicole mentioned, I'm Lee Zak, President of Agnes Scott College, and I hope you've enjoyed the festival in its virtual format. This festival is an inspiring showcase of the talented writers we have here at Agnes Scott and other colleges and universities throughout Georgia. As you may know, Agnes Scott is a liberal arts college where students are given the opportunity and the space to grow and develop their academic and creative interests. Located in Decatur, Georgia, right outside Atlanta, it is our mission to educate our students to think deeply, live honorably, and engage the intellectual and social challenges of our times. Our Scotties are by far some of the most talented, innovative, and creative individuals you ever will encounter. I definitely have witnessed this firsthand. They never cease to amaze and inspire me. Through our summit experience, students develop and are equipped with the necessary tools and experiences that prepare them not only for professional success, but also to be dynamic leaders in a global society. Of course, none of this would be possible without the experience and expertise and guidance from our stellar faculty. Our English department outshines them all, having developed some of the writing and literature world's best writers in all genres, and there are more to come. Thank you for all that you do. The Writers Festival is an amazing opportunity for the students to share their work outside the classroom. It serves as a place where we not only showcase their work, but celebrate their willingness to share and to create. Their work brings the campus community and the outside community together and experience the magic created by their writing and storytelling. To all of our students contributors, thank you. Thank you for sharing your work with us. To our guests, thank you for being here and for your support of our amazing students and for supporting the festival in its 50th year. This would not be possible without you. Now I know we're going to have an exciting evening this evening. I can't wait to hear from this evening's keynote speaker, Rita Dove. We are honored to have her here with us. I know you will be all inspired this evening with her discussion. And now I will turn the program over to Professor Alan Grosstefan, who will announce this year's winners of the Writers Festival Contest. Alan?
Thank you, President Zach. Good evening, everyone. So as President Zach said, I have the honor to announce the winners of the Writers Festival Contest this year. The contest, as many of you may know, is open to any undergraduate or graduate student enrolled in a Georgia college or university. This year, we received over 200 submissions, so competition was stiff. Judges from outside the college chose finalists in 4 genres: fiction, poetry, one-act play, and creative nonfiction. Each finalist is published in the Writers Festival magazine, which exists in print, but was also published online for the first time this year. And in a moment, I'll post the website for that in the chat so people can access it easily. Our visiting writers, Rita Dove and Jacqueline Goldfinger, had the difficult task of choosing one work in each category to receive first prize and a check for $500. They said they were blown away by the talent of all the writers in the magazine and struggled to make final decisions on the winners. Usually, each winner would come to the stage for a booming applause. This year, I'd like to ask our audience to applaud in your homes, and we'll have to imagine it. So, here come the winners. The prize in poetry goes to Ivy Clark from Mercer University, whose poem is titled Body Image. Congratulations, Ivy. The prize in fiction goes to Mike McClelland from University of Georgia in Athens, whose story is titled The Pioneer. Congratulations, Mike. The prize in creative nonfiction goes to Bella Braxton from Agnes Scott College, whose essay is titled Ducks for Ducks. Congratulations, Bella. In the category of playwriting, Rita Dove and Jacqueline Goldfinger had such a hard time choosing, they decided on 2 winners this year, both of whom will receive the $500 prize. The first winner is Maya Gelting from Agnes Scott College for her one-act play, Bones Under the Magnolia Tree. Congratulations.
Yeah.
The second winner in one-act play is H. Wagner for their play, And Blood and Blackberries. H is a student at Emory University. Congratulations to all of you and to all of the finalists. It is my pleasure to hand these proceedings over to the Dean of the College, Christine Cousins, who will make a kind of a special announcement for tonight.
Thanks, Alan. Before I start, I want to say a word of thanks to Nicole Stamets, who has done such an incredible job this festival. It's been just one terrific day after another. And she's been working for more than a year to make it happen and to make it as wonderful as it is. I know that there will be formal thanks, but she really deserves a special shout out from all of us for all the work that she's put into it. So it is a privilege to be here with you tonight at the 50th anniversary celebration of the Writers Festival, to remember and honor a member of our department, Professor Steve Guthrie, who passed away in 2019. When I was asked to talk about Steve at this year's Writers Festival, I reminded the department that I'm probably the biggest crier on campus and that I wouldn't be able to fight off the tears. But everyone at the meeting said that that was pretty much the case for them as well. So please bear with me. Agnes Scott is tremendously proud of our long tradition of valuing writing, and especially of the 50 years of bringing great writers to campus to read their works and interact with students. Another beloved late department member, Professor Bo Ball, started the festival back in the early 70s. Arriving in 1985, Steve soon became its heart and soul. Steve was a medievalist and taught courses on Chaucer, Dante, and the history of the English language, among other things. Students often spoke about getting the chills when he would recite poetry in Middle English. He developed many expertises. For example, he taught poetry writing in our creative writing program and originated 2 extremely popular literature courses, one on the detective novel and the other on American Indian literature. Outside of Agnes Scott, Steve had many interests that he pursued with intensity. Among these, he was a professional carpenter, an avid cyclist, and a cambrophile. Yeah, I had to look that up too. It means someone who loves whales, the place, not the animal. I eagerly sought his recommendations on not only detective novels, but also British television shows. He was a real expert. Steve could be stunningly insightful. One day, as I was planning my sabbatical, out of the blue, he looked at me and said a sentence that crystallized in my mind the nature of the writing project I had been struggling to define. On another occasion, again, out of the blue, he emailed me about a book on a new way of baking bread that he just knew I would like, and he was right. Steve was devoted to his family, and as the first of our generation of English professors to have grandchildren, derived so much joy from the experience that we all hoped to quickly follow suit. Whether promoting the Writers Festival or teaching or speaking at a faculty meeting, Steve focused on students. As our colleague, Professor Emerita Peggy Thompson put it, he modeled for all faculty and staff respectful and meaningful engagement with students, quietly teaching others the importance of learning about and realistically responding to students' diverse personal stories and situations, as well as their academic interests and professional goals. Students found in him a mentor who would listen carefully and act responsibly to help them handle the varied challenges they faced along the way to graduation. A poet and poetry teacher himself, as I mentioned, Steve loved creative writing and loved helping his students find their unique voices. He studied our students and brought them together with the great writers he thought would be powerful influences for them. Marilyn Nelson, Sharon Olds, Lee Young Lee, Yusef Kumunyakaya, Rita Dove, and current United States Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, to name only a few. For many years, Steve ran the Writers Festival's famous statewide creative writing contest. He edited and oversaw the publication of the festival magazine, shepherding it from the simple form of earlier days to the more sophisticated version of today. He was the first to engage students in editing and preparing the magazine and encourage the practice of displaying student art on the cover and inside. Sometimes over the years, the department would get caught up in debating whom to invite to the festival as guest writers or how to manage festival events during those 3 busy days. Steve would regularly remind us that the writing contest was the reason for the festival's existence and kept us focused on making the contest as exciting and inclusive as possible. He was always trying to expand the list of colleges and universities that participated and bring new voices to the contest. When we wanted to introduce the personal essay, Steve was supportive. And when we decided to bring in the one-act play, he worked hard to find a way to edit the finalists' manuscripts so that they used less white space than plays normally do in order to keep the magazine from running to too many pages. Steve was a generous editor, very generous, usually accepting quite a bit of creative punctuation and word usage, citing the author's right to poetic license. He guided the magazine through the always nerve-wracking printing process, making sure the printers followed his instructions. The moment when Steve wheeled into Buttrick the hand truck containing boxes of the 500 printed magazines always seemed to me to be the official start of that year's festival. At that moment, we were off and running for an exciting and, depending on the festival guests, sometimes harrowing 3 days of great writing and great conversation. A former member of our department, Professor Rachel Truesdale, remembers Steve for at least 3 great virtues, as she says: calm under pressure, idealism, and humanity. Echoing these themes, Professor Wakas Khwaja put together some of the many pieces that made Steve who he was, remembering him this way. Steve's hard work in shaping both the Writers' Festival and its goals, as well as the direction and scope of the contest, has been instrumental in raising their profile, reach, and importance. He was also committed to the idea of a living wage for all employees at the college and campaigned selflessly and vigorously to make that a reality at Agnes Scott. Perhaps his participation in and support for the 100,000 Poets for Change readings at the college, when first introduced in 2013, may not be as widely known. And here's a picture of Steve at that event. He's on the right, of course, and just note the t-shirt that he's wearing. His conviction that art, poetry, and creative writing were not divorced from politics and socioeconomic realities within which they were produced was the way he actually lived his life as well. Steve's life was a life well lived, and he is greatly missed as a colleague and inspiration to the Agnes Scott community. See, I told you. In memory of and gratitude for Steve, his many years of inspired teaching, department leadership, and dedication to the Writers' Festival and to the intersection of art, literature, and politics, the Department of English, in conversation with Steve's wife, Anne Eli, and his son, Andy Guthrie, has decided to name the Writers' Festival Writing Contest in his honor. I'm delighted to announce that the contest will hereafter be known as the Stephen R. Guthrie Memorial Writers' Festival Contest. And now I will turn the proceedings over to Professor Camila Aishamu.
Wow, thank you for that that beautiful tribute, Dean Cousins. Good evening, everybody. I cannot express to you what an honor it is to be here as a professor and a poet in this moment. Born in 1952, a precocious little Black girl from Akron who has always known her worth read every book she could, which made her realize how enormous the world is. Not only was it hers to travel and discover, she became determined to contribute her many talents and gifts to making it better. Some people's poems function as thermometers, taking the temperature of an event or experience, relaying the facts and feelings either the poet or persona may have as a result. Then there are other poems, like Dove's work, that operate as thermostats, doing this same work while also changing us by degrees, adjusting how we literally think or see or imagine. I've always marveled at how she mines the profound in everyday life as she crafts indelible records of a family's shared life and journey, like in Thomas and Beulah, the poetry collection that poetry in 1987, and certainly inspired how I approached writing my first collection. Among the many powers of Dove's poetry is its deep engagement with history, not as archaic record, but as a fundamental component crucial to our becoming. Artists embody and influence the consciousness of a society, and I agree wholeheartedly with Dove's assertion that Poetry is the repository of our collective emotional memory. Poets are the emotional historians that help humans celebrate triumphs, assess failures, cope, rally, love, and hopefully evolve. Her flame has lit the imagination of countless poets, opened them to their own powers of articulation and possibility through her striving and persistence, all of her trailblazing. Former poet laureate of the United States in Virginia, she holds the Pulitzer, the Heinz Award, the Emily Kirk Leadership Award, the Commonwealth Award, the Chubb Fellow at Yale, the Library of Virginia Lifetime Achievement Award, the Fulbright Lifetime Achievement Medal, the International Capri Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Furious Flower Poetry Center, which I was able to see her receive in person, numerous honorary doctorates, the National Humanities Medal bestowed by President Bill Clinton, the National Medal of Arts bestowed by President Barack Obama, Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and Distinguished Wallace Stevens Award winner. I'm so proud to say that I could go on and on. She is the Commonwealth Professor of English at the University of Virginia, where she has been teaching since 1989. I will never forget the year she was the guest poet at Cave Canem, a national organization for Black poets. I was in a crowded room full of fellows wide awake at 10 p.m. for her craft talk. It was scheduled then because night hours are her peak hours, and we were eager for every word. Every chair was filled, people were lining the walls and sitting on the floor. She shared her deep reverence for other genres strewn throughout her writing: dance, music, visual art. A trained classical cellist, gambist, and dancer, she understands how all of the disciplines complement and enliven each other. She answered our questions thoughtfully and thoroughly, displaying her commitment to staying curious and sharing glimpses into her process that have served many of us. The brilliance and generosity of spirit that has brought many of you here this evening came pouring out and blessed the young poets gathered. We were so excited by what she imparted, many stayed around a while to dance before returning to our work. Whenever I've encountered her since at other conferences and literary events, she's always been encouraging. The way Robert Hayden describes Frederick Douglass in his famous tribute poem is the way so many of us admire Rita Dove. This is a woman superb in love and logic, an artist who privileges beauty in all of its intricacies. Thank goodness she has been lauded with numerous awards and laurels that are richly deserved, yet she will also be remembered with the lives grown out of her audacious life. I shyly said this to you years ago, but I want to say again tonight, thank you for your paving, for the model of taking the whole world into your arms and twirling it around on your own terms, always. On behalf of the Agnes Scott College community and our guests gathered tonight, thank you and welcome back. Everyone, please show your appreciation for the luminous Rita Dove. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Camilla. That was so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I really don't know what to say. It's been a journey, and I'm so happy to see you all the time growing and become the luminous person that you are. Um, so I thank you. And I want to thank everyone here at Agnes Scott for all that you do, because there's so much that people don't see. I know, that you're working in the background to make it work, to make it possible for these young minds that have the freedom to think and to be curious and to go where they never imagined that they would go. And that work shows. I want to thank also all of the contest finalists and the winners, but all of you, because it was an absolute pleasure to read your work, all of yours. The agony came from trying to make a decision. You are all winners. because you have already shown that you have embraced the art, the discipline, and understand the prism through which the artist looks. So I thank you for showing me that there's hope for future generations in the art. It was all there. I thought tonight what I would do would be to read a little bit from each one of my books to show you in a way kind of a trajectory, but and then concentrate on some new poems at the end. Because as I thought back on the time that I had been at Agnes Scott, those many years ago, and all that has transpired since then, I think it was 92, something like that, and all that had transpired before that, and what I had imagined as a young woman in college, it certainly would not have been what I ended up being. And so I thought, let's take this journey with me and see how it all began. When I looked at my work from my first book, which was done by Carnegie Mellon. I'm going to show you the cover because it's a slim book. It's called The Yellow House on the Corner. And at that point, I think that I was often very much interested in bringing the life that we live every day to the page, and also hopefully in other people's hearts. And I began to think when I was starting to write seriously, and that was in college. Then when I say seriously, that means rewriting. You're not just saying, oh, these are my emotions, but saying, oh, these are my emotions, but I want to share them with someone else. How do I do that? Oddly enough, or perhaps presciently, I'm not sure, one of my first inspirations came from the sciences. My father was a chemist and he loved math. I loved math too for the way that it opened things. But the one piece of math, the one discipline math that stopped me was geometry. That was the first time that something stopped, because that dealt with all sorts of things that had nothing to do with reality, it seemed to me. Points that had no dimension, lines that went on forever. And I struggled with that because I wanted simple answers. And my father and my brother, who was a little older than me, said, you just have to imagine it so. Just sit down until you can imagine it. And that challenge to my imagination, which I had already had, in reading and literature, suddenly happened in terms of the very rooms that I was living in. And this poem came out of it. Geometry. I prove a theorem, and the house expands. The windows jerk free to hover near the ceiling. The ceiling floats away with a sigh. As the walls clear themselves of everything but transparency, the scent of carnations leaves with them. I am out in the open, and above the windows have hinged into butterflies, sunlight glinting where they've intersected. They are going to some point true and unproven. So this is just a little small poem that said that the journey, whatever that journey was going to be, was also going to be into the unknown. This afternoon when Jackie Goldfinger and I were talking, both of us were just reveling over the fact that when you write, you really always discover something along the way, something that you didn't know that you wanted to write about. It is in the work. This next poem is a case in point. It comes from my second book, Museum, which is in a certain ways, I'm going to show you the cover just because, the thing is I have a collected poems now, but these slim volumes were, my heart. These were my heart I was giving to the world at the time. And that's how I think of all those poems in their little houses. The museum, in a certain way, had testimonials to all sorts of people and of real, imagined, living and dead. This one is to a thing, to something that is something you have to imagine. Grape sherbet. My father loved to make ice cream. This was one of his favorites. If you think about the flavor of grape, it does not, the grape that you get, grape jelly does not taste like grapes, does it? It really doesn't. It's an imaginary taste. Grape sherbet. The day memorial. After the grill, Dad appears with his masterpiece, swirled snow, gelled light. We cheer. The recipe's a secret and he fights a smile, his cap turned up so the bib resembles a duck. That morning we galloped through the grassed over mounds and named each stone for a lost milk tooth. Each dollop of sherbet later is a miracle, like salt on a melon that makes it sweeter. Everyone agrees it's wonderful. It's just how we imagined lavender would taste. The diabetic grandmother stares from the porch, a torch of pure refusal. We thought no one was lying there under our feet. We thought it was a joke. I've been trying to remember the taste, but it doesn't exist. Now I see why you bothered, Father. It took me those two books, learning how to write about the ineffable, I guess you could say, learning how to write about the emotions that always slither away when you try to express them. 2 volumes before I could write the one that I knew I was working toward in a way, and that was Thomas and Beulah, which Camilla had mentioned. It is a double biography of sorts, based loosely on my grandparents, my maternal grandparents' lives, both of whom came up from the South to get work and to find a life, build a life in Akron, Ohio, in the Midwest. And I say it's a double biography because the first part is Thomas's side, the second is Beulah's. I'll read you one. I think what I'm going to do is just read you a couple of poems from Beulah's side because she always gets short shrift. This is the cover. It is a photograph, some photographs, old time photographs. We don't have those anymore when I think about it now. Here's a poem from Beulah's side. Now, let me just foreground it by saying this is taking place during the Depression, the Great Depression, in the 30s. And Akron, Ohio at that time was quite a vibrant place. The train tracks went right through there. The rubber tires were going through there on their way to get their bodies, their steel, and become cars in Detroit. But this is the Depression when things are starting to get rough. A hill of beans. One spring, the circus gave free passes and there was music. The screens unlatched to let in starlight. At the well, a monkey tipped her his fine red hat and drank from a china cup. By mid-morning, her cobblers were cooling on the sill. Then the tents folded and the grass grew back with a path torn waist-high to the railroad where the hobos jumped the slow curve just outside Union Station. She fed them while they talked, easy in their rags. Any 2 points make a line, they'd say, and we're gonna ride them all. Cat hairs came up with the dipper. Thomas tossed on his pillow as if at sea. When money failed for peaches, she pulled rhubarb at the edge of the field. Then another man showed up in her kitchen and she smelled fear in his grimy overalls, the pale eyes bright as salt. There wasn't even pork for the navy beans, but he ate straight down to the blue bottom of the pot and rested there a moment, hardly breathing. That night she made Thomas board up the well. Beyond the tracks, the city blazed as if looks were everything. They have 4 children. Anyone who's been a mother or a father who, present father, knows that as much as you love your children, there are times when you need to be away from them for a while. Daystar. She wanted a little room for thinking, but she saw diapers steaming on the line, a doll slumped behind the door. So she lugged a chair behind the garage to sit out the children's naps. Sometimes there were things to watch: the pinched armor of a vanished cricket, a floating maple leaf. Other days she stared until she was assured when she closed her eyes, she'd see only her own vivid blood. She had an hour at best before Liza appeared pouting from the top of the stairs. And just what was Mother doing out back with the field mice? Why, building a palace. Later that night, when Thomas rolled over and lurched into her, she would open her eyes and think of the place that was hers for an hour, where she was nothing, pure nothing, in the middle of the day. When I finished that book, and then against all expectations or imaginings, it had gotten the Pulitzer, the world changed a little bit for me. It got bright and loud in good ways and in some bad ways, because I am basically a shy person. So to be put into limelight was a little disconcerting. I remember saying to my English chair at the time, I was teaching at Arizona State University, and he was organizing a press conference. And I said, a press conference? I don't know how to give a press conference. And he said, you'll learn. And I think about that every time I come up to a new situation. You'll learn. So I had to learn. And I also wanted to write in the middle of all of this. So I decided that one of the things I wanted to do was to write an Ars Poetica. What did I really believe in as an artist? And I balked at this idea of actually putting it down, because for me, it's always a discovery and always a new thing. So in this next book, which is called Grace Notes, and this is a cover that I really adore. It's by Georgia O'Keeffe. I decided to write an anti-Ars Poetica. Ars Poetica. 30 miles to the only decent restaurant was nothing, a blink in the long, dull stare of Wyoming. Halfway there, the unknown but terribly important essayist yelled, "Stop, I want to be in this," and walked 15 yards onto the land before sky bore down and he came running, crying, "Jesus, there's nothing out there." I once met an Australian novelist who told me he never learned to cook because it robbed creative energy. What he wanted most was to be mute. He stacked up pages. He entered each day with an axe. What I want is this poem to be small, a ghost town on the larger map of wills. Then you can pencil me in as a hawk. A traveling X marks the spot. I have often been asked, what my voice is, or how did I find my voice? And I always say I'm still looking. A voice changes as much as the rest of a person changes, as much as your look changes. The next book that came was a book that was written while I was also struggling with motherhood. Now, I thought that the early years of motherhood were hard because you don't get any sleep. And like Beulah in that poem, you go and sit out in behind the garage and just hope for 3 seconds of peace. But what also was hard was letting go, because I discovered that as our daughter began to grow and she was turning 8, 9, she was her own person. And I began to mourn that. And these poems came, in effect, a little bit out of that. I began writing sonnets, which are, I think, appropriate love poems. And they were all based on the myth of Persephone and Demeter, the idea that a mother's daughter is kidnapped by the god of the underworld and snatched away. It is, of course, every parent's most horrible nightmare. And I remember my daughter coming into the room once. I always left my door open so that she could, if she wanted to see what I was doing, she could. And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing these poems." And then she looked at one. She was about 10. And she said, "Oh, you're writing about us." And she skipped off. I thought, okay, for the words. So anyway, this is a cover. It's a Romare Bearden print. And kind of luscious paradise before the fall. I will read just one poem out of this book, one of the sonnets, Demeter's Prayer to Hades. This alone is what I wish for you, knowledge. To understand each desire has an edge, to know we are responsible for the lives we change. No faith comes without cost, no one believes without dying. Now, for the first time, I see clearly the trail you planted, what ground open to waste, though you dreamed a wealth of flowers. There are no curses, only mirrors held up to the souls of gods and mortals. And so I give up this fate too. Believe in yourself. Go ahead. See where it gets you. Okay. A few days ago, I was asked by one of my students, how can we emerge from this pandemic? We've been yearning for it for so long. How can we now step outside? And we talked a bit about this phenomenon that many of us are kind of hesitant about going out in the world. We've forgotten how to do it. And then I thought to myself, well, it's like anything else in the way you just do it. You learn again. This poem comes from a book that's called On the Bus with Rosa Parks. It has a bus up here. It's very hard to see, I know, but the title for the book came from my daughter. We were actually at an event where Rosa Parks was appearing, and we were all, there's a whole lineup of guests. So we were being bussed from one venue to another. We walked into the bus. I and my husband and my daughter, we went to the back of the bus. Rosa Parks was sitting up front. And as we passed her, we said hello, and we went and sat down. And our daughter said, "We're on the bus with Rosa Parks." It's a perfectly iambic line, right? We're on the bus with Rosa Parks. And I asked her if I could borrow it. She said, sure. She said, for commission, for fee. This poem is called Dawn Revisited. It's my answer to that student of mine who asked, how do we step out? Imagine you wake up with a second chance. The blue jay hawks his pretty wares and the oak still stands spreading glorious shade. If you don't look back, the future never happens. How good to rise in sunlight in the prodigal smell of biscuits, eggs and sausage on the grill. The whole sky is yours to write on, blown open to a blank page. Come on, shake a leg. You'll never know who's down there frying those eggs if you don't get up and see. Right after I finished that book, I just sent it off to the copy editor. Lightning struck our house and it burned down. I remember feeling grateful that I had gotten the book out, because at that point in our lives, you know, we dealt with a lot of paper. And in the rebuilding of that house, in the first step, of course, writing was the last thing on my mind. I couldn't imagine what writing would be. Our neighbors tried to cheer us up by taking us to a dinner dance. And when we got there and we saw people properly dancing, when I say properly, I mean waltzing, doing all, I said, I've always wanted to do that. And that same neighbor signed up the entire neighborhood for ballroom dance lessons. So I learned how to ballroom dance. You follow the bliss, you follow your curiosity, you open yourself to things. I was not dreaming of poems, and yet suddenly the poems came and became this book, which is called American Smooth. It has a wonderful image on it by Gordon Parks. American Smooth is, of course, at that point, Dancing with the Stars wasn't very big, but now, of course, it's everyone knows, pretty much everyone knows that American Smooth is the dances like waltz and foxtrot, things like that. So I entered this amazing, glittery, completely out there world of ballroom dancing. Now, when you go to a dance or go to any kind of competition or anything like that, there are always women or men who are there selling those ballroom dresses, and they are fantastic and fantastical. They either have too little material or too much, but always glitter, glitter, glitter. This is one of the poems that emerged out of that experience and became part of that book, American Smooth, which is quite a few poems about dancing in it, of all kinds. Brown. Why, you look good in every color, the dress lady gurgled just before I stepped onto the parquet for a waltz. I demurred. We were in a country club after all, and she, fresh from Fort Lauderdale, do people actually live there? With 5 duffel bags worth of ball gowns, enough tulle and fringe and pearls to float a small cotillion, was only trying to earn a living. For once, I was not the only Black person in the room, 2 others, both male. I thought of Sambo. I thought a few other things unmentionable here. Don't get me wrong. I've always loved my skin, the way it glows against citron and fuchsia, the difficult hues. But the difference I cause whenever I walk into a polite space is why I prefer grand entrances, especially with a waltz, that European constipated swoon. The dress in question was red. Someone who made a grand entrance in 1940 was Hattie McDaniel, who made an entrance into the Coconut Grove for the Oscars. That she had been nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, and she won it. She played a maid in Gone with the Wind. Many people said you shouldn't have played a maid. She's like, well, what else is there for me to play? And that year, in order to even enter into the place where they were giving out the awards, you had to walk around a corner, and the red carpet was actually 1.5 blocks long. Hattie McDaniel arrives at the Coconut Grove late, in aqua and ermine, gardenia scaling her left sleeve in a spasm of scent, her gloves white, her smile chastened, purse giddy with stars and rhinestones clipped to her brilliantined hair, on her free arm that fine Negro, Mr. Wonderful Smith. It's the day that isn't, February 29th, at the end of the shortest month of the year, and the shittiest too, everywhere except Hollywood, California, where the maid can wear mink and still be a maid, bobbing her bandaged head and cursing the white folks under her breath as she smiles and shoos their silly daughters in from the night dew. What can she be thinking of, striding into the ballroom where no black face has ever showed itself except above a serving tray? Hi-Hat Hattie, Mama Mac, her haughtiness, the little lady from Showboat whose name Bing forgot, Beulah and Bertha and Melina and Carrie and Violet and Cynthia and Fidelia, one half of the dark Barrymores. Dear Mammy, we can't help but hug you, crawl into your generous lap, tease you with arch innuendo, so we can feel that much more wicked and youthful and sleek. But oh, what we forgot. The 4 husbands, the phantom pregnancy, your famous parties, your celebrated icebox cake. Your giggle above the red petticoats rustle, black girl and white girl walking hand in hand down the railroad tracks in Kansas City, 6 years old. The man who advised you now that you were famous to begin eliminating your more common acquaintances, and your reply, catching him square in the eye, that's a good idea. I'll start right now by eliminating you. Is she or isn't she? 3 million dishes, a truckload of aprons and head drags later, and here you are poised between husbands and factions. No corset wide enough to hold you in, your huge face a dark moon split by that spontaneous smile, your trademark, your curse. No matter, Hattie. It's a long, beautiful walk into that flower-smothered standing ovation. So go on and make them wait. This next book, I really have a difficulty reading anything out of because it's of a piece. It's a story in verse. It's called Sonata Melodica. See if we can it is a true story. It's a story of a man whose father was he called himself an African prince. He probably came from the islands. His mother came from the area near Poland, and he was born in he lived most of his life in the 19th century, born in the late 18th century. He was a prodigy violinist. His name was George Polgreen Augustus Bridgetower. Such a name. It's such an amazing name. And he basically, Beethoven, when he met him and discovered what an amazing and brilliant performer he was, he decided to compose a sonata for him. And that sonata we know today as the Kreutzer Sonata. The story of how the dedication that Beethoven wrote for Bridgetower got changed to the Kreutzer is the basis of the book. And it's also the reason I hoped to restore him to some kind of prominence, to bring him back into history. Once I had learned about George Bridgetower, I could not forget him. So I'm going to read for you, sitting here trying to decide, but I think I'm going to read this poem because it's deep in the book. I usually have read the introductory poem, which basically tells you the whole story. You can get the story out of the way and not concentrate on the characters. But this poem is deep in the book. It's right before he meets Beethoven. He has come back to Poland. He's been spending most of his time in England, where he's been a star violinist in the court. And he's come back to Dresden to play a few concerts with his brother. His brother was a cellist. We know very little about his brother because he stayed there. And so it's right at the cusp of his fame, of his brief moment of fame. The next step for him after he leaves Dresden is to meet Ludwig van Beethoven. And so here he is in Dresden. I don't think there's much you need to know except that they are playing in the cathedral. It is the end of winter, It's very dark. Floating Requiem, Dresden, 1802 to 1803. Summer ended powerfully, as if God had snapped a branch from his mightiest oak and thundered, "Enough." The sky dimmed, cloaks appeared. The Elbe's blue road turned wild and gray, struck by a grim fury. Everywhere one trudged, stone claimed dominion and set an implacable face to the centuries, only to culminate in this pleasing line of turrets and domes along the rapidly darkening riverfront. Wind fingered the crevices, timbered walls stiffened as chill seeped up through our boots. Cathedrals thrilled to their tasks, spires bristling at twilight, and the doors cranked wide to spew out their gold. High in the organ loft we waited, my brother and I, skins burnished by candlelight, instruments gleaming. Watch them enter, the weary, the obedient, the curious, a ghostly scent of malted barley rising from their thick woolens and flaxen hair. They came for comfort, dragging the cold in behind them. They came for light, then closed their eyes the better to listen. Cello plowing low while I skimmed the thin ice above, teased the bright edges. All winter we played and they lingered through incense and gingerbread, from Advent to Christkindl to New Year's to Dry Könige, a salute to Balthasar, the Dark King. And when the listening was finished, they stood up to gather their bundles. The last candle guttered, and we stepped out to a world rinsed of cares. A pale lemon light shone over the river. On the far shore, I could see a faint radiance, a white path, snowbells budding, shouldering up through the muck for their first raw gulp of pure ether. And I knew it was time to take destiny further south. You can see the line is getting longer in the poems, and I was also trying to stretch that line and see how close it could come to a melodic prose. And I also had steeped myself a lot. I spoke German, and so I steeped myself in that Germanic sentence, which can go on forever. One of the things that when I was a child, about 10 years old, I discovered that I shared a birthday with Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the German poet. And so I think all my life I've kind of looked at him and said, what would Goethe do? And then sometimes I did exactly the opposite. But one of Goethe's poems I've carried around with me for years. It's a very short poem. I think it's one of those perfect little poems because it rhymes, it matches what it wants to do. And I wanted to translate it. And I worked on it for about, I think, 10 years before I finally got a version that I kind of like. So I thought I would read it to you. The story behind this is that Goethe was just taking a walk, and he was walking through the woods. And he had written a poem the day before about walking through the woods, so he just titled this one, another one. I'll read it first in German. Ein Gleiches. Über alle Gipfel ist Ruhe. In allen Wipfeln spürest du kaum einen Hauch. Die Vögelein schweigen im Walde. Warte nur, balde ruhest du auch. I wanted to read in German so you could hear all of those wonderful rhymes, which are the devil to translate. Above the mountaintops, all is still. Among the treetops, you can feel barely a breath. Birds in the forest stripped of song. Just wait. Before long, you too shall rest. this poem is it's actually the last poem in my next book, which is coming out this summer. It's called A Playlist for the Apocalypse. Sorry for that title, but that's what we are in. And I'll read you a couple of poems from there, and then I know we're going to have, questions and answers, which I'm looking forward to. So let me start with this poem because this is something we haven't been able to do for a while, and that is have family reunions. Now, when my family gets together, like I said, they came up from the South, though I was born in Ohio and grew up Midwestern, and most of my cousins did. As soon as we get together, especially my Cleveland cousins, we just go right into a Southern drawl. This is what we heard from our parents and our grandparents, and that's where somehow we feel at home. So here's a family reunion poem. 30 seconds into the barbecue, my Cleveland cousins have everyone speaking Southern, broadened vowels and dropped consonants, whoops and caws. It's more osmosis than magic, a sliding thrall back to the time when working the tire factories meant entire neighborhoods coming up from Georgia or Tennessee, accents helplessly intact, while their children, inflections flattened to match the field they thought they were playing on, knew without asking when it was safe to roll out a drawl. Just as it's understood, potluck means resurrecting the food we've abandoned along the way for the sake of sleeker thighs. I look over the yard to the porch with its battalion of aunts, the wavering ranks of uncles at the grill. Everywhere else, hordes of progeny are twirling, and my cousins yakking on as if they were waist deep in quicksand, but like the books recommend, aren't moving until someone hauls them free. Who are all these children? Who had them and with whom? Through the general coffee tones, the shamed genetics cut a creamy swath. Cherokee's burnt umber transposed onto generous lips, a glance flaring gray above the crushed nose we label anonymous African. It's all there, the beautiful geometry of Mendel's peas and their grim logic. And though we remain clearly divided on the merits of okra, there's still time to demolish the cheese grits and tear into slow-cooked ribs so tender we agree they're worth the extra pound or two our menfolk swear will always bring them home. Pity the poor soul who lives a life without butter, those pinched knees and tennis shoulders and hatchety smiles. Sometimes a poem spills over into another book. This was a poem I've been working on. I wanted to put it into American Smooth because it's about the mambo, and it just did not want to come. And finally, after the book was done, I said, okay, I'm here now. So, Borderline Mambo. As if the lid stayed on the marmalade. As if you could get the last sip of champagne out of the bottom of the fluted glass. As if we weren't all dying, as if we were all not going to die sometime, as if we knew for certain when or how. As if the baseball scores made sense to the toddler, as if the dance steps mattered or there's a point where they don't. For instance, wheelchair, heart flutter, oxygen bottle mounted on the octogenarian's back at the state ballroom competition. That's Manny still pumping the mambo with his delicious slip of an instructor. Hip, hip, hooray. Mambo, for instance, if done right, gives you a chance to rest. One beat in 4, one chance in 4, one chance in 10, 100, as if we could understand what that means. Hooray. Keep pumping, as if you could keep the lid on a secret once the symptoms start to make sense. A second instant, a respite. A third, always that hope. If we could just scrape that last little bit out, if only it wouldn't bottom out before they can decode the message sent to the cells. Of course, it matters when, even though, because we live in mystery. For instance, beauty, love, honor, as if we didn't like secrets. Point where it hurts. Of course, we'll tell. I have been asked, and it was a glorious collaboration, asked to work with a composer by the name of Richard Daniel Poor on a group of poems that talked about the last 50, 60 years. This suite of poems, this has become a song cycle. It was supposed to be premiered this year at the Kennedy Center, and so it's been delayed. It'll come out at some point, called A Standing Witness. I will read one of the poems from that song cycle. It's a villanelle, and it's called 1968. And that was the year when it seemed the world was going to end. Everyone was being killed. We now know that these things just keep coming around. 1968. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken? No more princes for the poor, loss whittling you thin. Grief is a constant now, hope the last word spoken. In a dance of two elegies, which circles the drain? A token year with its daisies and carbines is where we begin. Who comforts you now? That the wheel has broken is Mechanics 101. To keep dreaming when the joke's on you, well, crazier legends have been written. Grief is the constant now. Hope, the last word spoken on a motel balcony, shouted in a hotel kitchen. No kin can make this journey for you. The route's locked in. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken the bodies of its makers? Beyond the smoke and ashes, what you hear rising is nothing but the wind. Who comforts you? Now that the wheel has broken, grief is the constant. Hope, the last word spoken. The spring cricket considers the question of negritude. I was playing my tunes all by myself. I didn't know anybody else could play along. Sure, the tunes were sad, but sweet too, and wouldn't come until the day gave out. You know that way the sky has of dangling her last bright wisps? That's when the ache would bloom inside until I couldn't wait. I knelt down to scrape myself clean and didn't care who heard. Then came the shouts and whistles, the roundup into jars, a clamber of legs. Now there were others, tumbled, clouded. I didn't know their names. We were a musical lantern. Children slept to our rasping sighs. And if now and then one of us shook free and sang as he climbed to the brim, he would always fall again, which made them laugh and clap their hands. At least then we knew what pleased them and where the brink was. And I will end with, let me see, maybe I should, I'll end with these two poems. This first one takes place in my hometown now, Charlottesville, a sleepy college town until a couple of years ago when Nazis descended on us. And now it's a household name. And but prior to that time, I was driving down the street. It was a sunny spring day, and this event happened. Pedestrian crossing, Charlottesville. A gaggle of girls giggle over the bricks leading off Court Square. We break dutifully and wait, but there's at least 20 of these knock-kneed creatures, blonde and curly, still at an age that thinks impudence is cute. Look how they dart and dither, changing flanks as they lurch along, golden goblets of infuriating foolishness or pure joy, depending on one's disposition. At the moment, mine's sour. This is taking far too long. Don't they have minders? Just behind my shoulder in the city park, the Southern General still stands, stonewalling us all. When I was their age, I judged Goldilocks nothing more than a pint-sized criminal who flounced into others' lives, then assumed their clemency. Unfair, I know, my aggression, to lump them into a gaggle, silly geese, when all they're guilty of is being young so far. And I'll end with this another spring cricket poem. I'll also say that my daughter was the inspiration for these poems as well, because when she was, there's a whole group of poems spoken by a spring cricket. When she was about 5, she used to go around the house saying, "Nobody loves me but the spring cricket." And we had no idea who the spring cricket was and why she didn't appreciate our love. She now claims that she doesn't remember a thing, but it started these spring cricket poems. And so I will end with this one. I thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions. Postlude. You prefer me invisible, no more than a crisp salute, far away from your silks and firewood and woolens. Out of sight, I'm merely an annoyance, one slim, obstinate wrinkle in night's deepening trance. When sleep fails, you wish me shushed and back in my hole. As usual, you're not listening. Time stops only if you stop long enough to hear it passing. This is my business. I've got 10 weeks left to croon through. What you hear is a lifetime of song. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has just been completely, yes, magnificent, as somebody put in the chat. We have questions and answers for about 15 minutes. So if anybody has a question, we'd love to hear it. Personally, selfishly, I mean, I want to say thank you all the time, but also I love that you have read from so many different of your works. I've been reading through your collected works. I taught Thomas and Beulah a couple of weeks ago to a class of students, many of whom are in the audience. And so it's a real delight to hear you read through your magnificent collection.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to do that because I think that so often, I know I thought this when I was a young writer, I would hear someone read a poem and think, I can never do that. And of course, you don't start there. When you're writing as a young person, you start, you just work your way into it. And so I wanted to give a sense of that journey.
I think you absolutely did.
Well, come on, don't be shy.
Yeah.
Ask me some questions. We've got that chat thing out and I'm learning how to use it. So we'll see between them.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead. My husband and I were talking, I mean, we're always talking, but we were talking after the Monday night faculty retrospective about where the festival might go in the next 50 years. And there was some conversation both about librettists and librettos and how many poets are moving in that direction. And of course, this is something that you and Jackie Goldfinger were talking about in the Q&A this afternoon. And we also talked about translation. And so, you have happily brought both of those back to the fore of my mind. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit, I mean, you did this afternoon, but a little bit about how thinking in different genres and different literary traditions and, languages, how that influences how you're writing and how you're thinking about your work.
Well, I mean, if we think about it, one of the things that that every artist is trying to do is to express the inexpressible, the unexpressible, the things that we can't get into words. And so to go to another genre and to see how they are working with it can stretch one's own language. I think when I first began studying foreign languages in German and realized that there were words that I could find no translation for in English, and yet I knew exactly what they meant. That made me think, oh my gosh, we've got to find those words. I mean, also as a musician, I thought, how do you get that feeling of that vibration of music into the word? And so it stretches the language. I'm just totally curious about any discipline, and I wish that creative writing and sculpture and architecture and music and drama, I wish we all were put in one, amazing building so that we could rub up against each other.
Well, that cross-pollination and interdisciplinarity is essential for great writing and for being in the world. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and they're quite similar, so I'm going to kind of smush them together. They are about your writing process, rituals, habits. How do you get into the headspace?
Ooh. Well, first of all, I want to say something right before that. My writing process may not be your writing process. Everyone has something different. And when I was growing up, I thought that, I read about a different writer, someone who would get up in the break of dawn and write. And I know that Toni Morrison would start out and wait for the first light to hit the page and then write. And so I thought, I should get up in the morning. I've never been a morning person, but I thought I should get up in the morning and write, and I wasn't writing. So what I tend to do, I finally listened to my body and began to write at night. If I can do it, if my schedule allows it, my perfect writing time is from like midnight to 6 in the morning. I love those hours. I'm fully awake. It's just very hard for me to get to sleep at any other time. So that's the first thing. Find your space, find your time when you are most vibrant, and, make everything else take a back seat if you can to do that. On the other hand, I also know that you write when you can. And I will write, I used to write every single day at a certain time. Now it's as many days as I can, whenever I can, but usually at night. In meeting with other writers, I've heard stories of people who, had jobs, of course, which prevented them from writing, and they only had 15 minutes here or there, so they wrote for 15 minutes. You write when you can, and your body and your brain will also adjust. I tend to write in fragments. I write in tons. And when I say fragments, I have notebooks, and I like a pen. I don't use pencil. And I like to, I'll scribble something in a notebook, and it might make it onto a piece of paper, or it might make it onto might get printed out, but it might be the very middle of a poem. I don't know why this happens. I'm not going to question the muse if she wants it that way. But what happens is that I have many, many folders, and some of them are here. Let me see if I can. There are all sorts of folders, from ones that contain lots of material, things that all seem to fit together, and or ones that are, just your plain old folders. But the only thing that's different is that these scraps, as they start to accrue and as they start to become drafts and as they start to become poems, I have to be able to find them again. And the only filing system that I have is one of color. I put them in different colored folders. I don't want to label a poem, from the outside and say, oh, this is a sad poem. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So for instance, if I'm going into my room to write, and there are days when I'll go in and I have not an idea in my head, quote unquote. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to work on, but I will look and say, I feel like the purple folder today. And I'll go to the purple folder and see what's in there. And sometimes, so it's kind of weird, but it works for me.
I think that idiosyncratic, the permission to be oneself and to work in the way that makes sense to one at the moment is really important. And to recognize that, of course, we change over time and as our circumstances change.
Yes.
One of the questions in the chat is kind of connected as well. And it is, when do you feel a poem is done? If you are collecting and drafting from there, how do you know when to stop?
Well, that's the crazy thing, because there's a point where a poem will take on its own momentum. In a certain way, it says, get out of the way, Rita, I know I got this. And that's a wonderful moment. I mean, that's when I'm just writing as fast as I can. That doesn't mean that it's finished, but it means that it's becoming a poem. And then comes the pairing and making sure that it isn't, that things haven't been repeated and all that. What I tend to do, I usually I can't answer this question. I mean, it's hard to know when it's finished. Sometimes you say, okay, that's it. It's finished. Sometimes it's sort of like, I give up. I mean, I can't do any better than this. But what I often will do is print out the poem, put it on the desk with nothing else around it. The first thing I look at in the morning, or whatever counts for me as morning, at that point, before I have my coffee, I will go in and read it. And if it still holds muster, then I think it's probably done.
That's wonderful. There are several questions in the chat. The most recent one is sort of long, and it does connect to an earlier one. So I'm going to read this most recent question and then kind of link it to the other. So Kira Tucker says, you spoke about the world becoming louder after winning the Pulitzer for Thomas and Beulah. Now it seems the world is growing louder and louder as we witness numerous apocalyptic turns. When addressing history and the din of our current moment, how does your work balance silence and restraint amid the various forms of loudness we face?
Wow, what a great question.
It's a great question. And the other one that I think is connected is from Sean, and it's about the distinction, if you see one, between parenting and myth and history. So Sean writes, I really enjoyed Mother Love. Did it feel similar to work with myth versus history? So I think it's questions about how do we be in the world?
Yes.
What do we do?
Yes, they are related in a way, because what myth does is in a certain way a kind of a stylized or an extraction of human characteristics and drives. And the stories that myths tell are in essence, I mean, they're explorations of human character. So if you go into a myth deeply enough, you will discover things about your current moment and current time, I think. If you go into history and look at historical events, so often they are all character driven in a certain way. There are the characters who work there. So I think that how does one do this? Well, do you know what's interesting is the world is getting louder, but then we have this pandemic in the midst of other apocalyptic forces, I would say some political ones. And in the midst of all of that loudness, the fact that we have social media, which is it's loud in a different way. I mean, it's always there, it's always at us. Suddenly we had to stay inside. suddenly we had to stay physically in a space which was quiet. It's quiet physically. It may not be quiet because people are in your house and your babies are screaming, all that stuff, but these are your four walls. You see them every day. And that becomes, in a very interesting way, a contemplative space, even in the midst of all of the turmoil that goes on in the house. Because if you see the same thing every day, you start thinking about, well, what matters in the world? There's nothing to distract you from that big question. And so, interestingly enough, I think that there is quiet to be found in the midst of all this loudness. The last poem that I read about postlude is about that too. You know, time stops. If you listen, you'll hear it passing, which is of course history, but you'll also, you have to stop to listen. So I'm fascinated and really interested to see what's going to come out of all this loudness, Kira. I think that there will be a turn to a bigger turn to myth, Shah, because if you want to talk about turmoil and loudness, you can't really get much louder than the Greek myths, for instance. Um, and the way, or you can't get grimmer than the grim fairy tales. And so they teach us something about human hatred, jealousy, perseverance, love, and those things we hold on to because someone else has felt it, someone else has made it through, and that'll help us too.
I think that's a perfect place to conclude. There are more questions, and I imagine some of the people posing them will be with you in the morning at the workshop for finalists. And so we are so honored to have you join us. If only we were in person, if only.
There would be some hugs.
There would be some hugs. But we'll definitely prioritize this when we're able to do such a thing. And on behalf of all of us at Agnes Scott, thank you so much for your wonderful work and your wonderful words.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a magical evening. Thank you so much. I love you.
There's a lot of great love in the chat. I'm going to share my screen and we will have this really great slides. I know the slides are so good.
Cool.
They're so cool. The next one moves on its own. So our big thank you slides. I had too much fun with PowerPoint.
Wow, you really did.
I got kind of excited about what was possible, but there were so many people to thank, and here they all are. So thank you to everyone for making this very special event very special. And in particular, thank you to Rita Dove for joining us once again, to President Zach and Dean Cousins and Professors Grosssteven and Moon. We're very, very lucky, and we're very excited about tomorrow's events. So we hope you'll join us then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.